Hey guys, John here, and welcome back to the GForce OB-X tutorial course. In today's video, we're going to be concentrating on the control panel right over here. So here we can influence the behavior of different parameters with velocity, so how hard or how soft we hit our notes. And we have Aftertouch as well, so the harder we press while we're holding down those notes. And here we can also detune Oscillator 2, which you should know by now. And then over here on the right-hand side, we have Portamento or Glide. So let's first dive into the velocity settings here. Okay, so this velocity knob right here, this is going to affect the depth of modulation of the parameter chosen here in this velocity destination screen. And by default, this is going to be VCF, so our filter. So what we can do if we hit a soft note and we hit a loud note, it's going to sound the same. However, if we have our velocity and we turn this all the way up, let's hit a soft note. So the filter is rather closed. And now if we hit a hard note, the filter is rather open. So the velocity is controlling how much of that filter is going to be opening up. Now, if we right click this menu here, we have a couple different options to pick from. So let's take a look at gain here. And the same concept applies, right? So if we hit a soft note here and we hit a loud note, the only difference here is going to be our filter that we did just a minute ago. However, if we bring this velocity all the way to the top here and hit a soft note and then a loud note, so not only does the filter open, but also the gain increases. And what's actually really cool, so for example, we can bring down this gain to maybe around 57 or so percent, and then we can right click and we can go back to the VCF. So now we have basically independent values. So each entry here gets its own velocity dial over here. So we can have our filter maybe a little bit down here if it's not too intense, then we can go back to our gain, and this is going to be still set at 57%. Same with all the other ones here as well. So from an init preset, we can right click this velocity destination. So we went over this first one, the VCF, then we went over the gain, which is the amplitude. The third one down here is going to be Fmod. Now, this is not frequency modulation. This is going to be filter modulation. So this setting here is going to correspond to this modulation dial right over here, which is rather self-explanatory. And then we have this FDEC, which is the filter decay. Now, this one is particularly interesting. So if we click this one, the softer we hit a note, the faster the decay on the filter envelope is going to move. The harder we hit it, the longer it's going to take. So for example, if we have this one selected, let's give it full velocity amount. Now let's bring our cutoff pretty substantially low like this and give a healthy amount of modulation here and maybe some resonance just so we can really hear things go. And if we bring our decay down just a little bit like this, let's hit a soft note. Now that decay is pretty fast, but if we hit it really hard and hit it hard again, it's pretty slow. And then let's do it really soft. It's almost instant. Now, this is really cool too because we can play softly and then have a pretty quick decay for our filter. Then if we really dig into our keys, then it's going to be a little bit more dynamic. The filter is going to close a little bit slower. So I feel like using this one here can really bring some realism into your patches. Okay, so now is where it gets really, really cool. So if we right click this here again, we went over these first four ones, but now we have these ones called M1, M2, M3, and M4. Now these correspond to our four macros down here on the bottom right, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if we select macro 1 and give this full velocity for now, the idea here is that all the parameters that we've attached to our macro, those can then be controlled via velocity. So for example, if we have this all the way at the top selected on macro 1, let's go to macro 1 to make something really obvious. So let's grab this cross here and let's drag and drop this to the frequency. And then we right click and then give it a healthy amount of depth. So now if you look here, this amount where this green here is, this is going to correspond to our velocity ranges. So for example, let's bring this down real quick. If we play a note and we move our macro, this is going to change our pitch. Right, so the bottom here is going to be where this arrow is here. At the top of this macro is going to be the end of this green line. So this is our range that we have to move through. So if we bring this velocity all the way up and we hit a soft note, we're going to get this pitch. If we hit a hard note, we're going to get that pitch. So basically, all the parameters that we can attach to a macro, so let's say we do pitch with maybe a filter cutoff, maybe some resonance or something crazy. We have a lot of parameters attached to a macro. Then all those parameters are going to be dynamic based upon our velocity, which is really, really, really cool. That's how you can make some patches really crazy and very, very expressive and very playable and dynamic. So next up, we have the Aftertouch section. Now, not all keyboards are going to support Aftertouch, but if yours does, this is where things start to get really interesting. So the same concept applies. This dial up here is going to be the depth of the parameters that we attach this to. And right below this here is going to be our destination menu. So if we right click this here, we can see some of the familiar ones. So the VCF, which we just talked about for the velocity, we have our gain, and then we have M1, 2, 3, and 4. So your Aftertouch can also control the macro parameters, but we have a couple different ones as well. So here we have LFOR, which is going to stand for the rate. So the LFO rate, so how fast that LFO is going to move. So if you play a chord or play some notes and you start digging into your keyboard, the rate of the LFO is going to increase, which is actually really, really cool. And then we have some other ones down here. We have LFO D1 and LFO D2. Now, both of these are going to correspond to the destination. So these depth dials down over here on our modulation section, which we just talked about in the last video. So let's say you have like your LFO attached to maybe the filter, maybe the OSC2 tuning, and then maybe on this one you have some pulse width modulation. So the more you dig into this, then the more it's going to open up, which is actually really cool. So these knobs are going to open up. And then we have our vibrato rate, so how fast that vibrato is going to move, and then the vibrato depth, so how deep that vibrato is going to move. So what you could do is if you play a chord nice and soft and you have a vibrato going, the more you dig into it, the more that vibrato can speed up and the more depth that thing can have, so the more room it can move through. So if you do have a keyboard that supports Aftertouch, I highly recommend to start attaching some of these settings here because you can really get a dynamic patch. The more you dig into your keys, more things start modulating, or if you attach things to macros, that would be pretty cool as well. And the same concept applies here. So if we give this some Aftertouch for our filter, we can go to macro 1, the knob's going to reset and it's going to save those values. So all of these settings here have their own independent dial for this section up here, as does the velocity. So next up, we have the Oscillator 2 detune knob. Now, it's pretty self-explanatory if we have Oscillator 2 inside the mix here, and we start turning this. It's going to start detuning the second oscillator. Now, when we turn this to the right, Oscillator 2 will become sharp, and to the left, it will become flat. Something else to keep in mind is, yes, we can detune Oscillator 2 right over here. However, we can also detune the oscillators themselves in the oscillator section. So for example, we just have oscillator 1 in the mix, and we can detune it here with the frequency knob. Now this is going to be in semitones. However, if you're on a Mac, you can hold down Command and then do some fine tuning. If you're on Windows, you can hold down Control. So for example, I'm on Windows, so I'll hold down Control and I can move this here and it's going to go in smaller increments here. So these might be a little bigger than you might want. So depending on what you're doing with your patch, you can either reach for the detuning here, or you can do it here on the oscillator detune. Directly to the right of the Oscillator 2 detune is going to be our Portamento. So this is going to be where notes slide into each other. And as we turn this dial, we can see up here on the top bar, the timing for these notes. So if you put it pretty high up here like this and we play some notes, the notes start gliding into each other. Now, it's very, very important to know that the portamento in this synthesizer is polyphonic. This means that each voice will glide from note to note independently. So let's take a closer look at this because this can be rather confusing if you don't know that it's polyphonic. So from an init preset, if we crank this portamento to around 50%, and notice we have 16 voices and we start hitting the same note, it's going to keep gliding. Now, this is because each voice glides independently. Now, if you bring our voices down to 1 and do the same thing, here's the first note. We have that glide, and let's keep hitting the same note. It's not going to glide because it's just that one voice, so let's do some bouncing back between some notes. So this is probably going to be the behavior that we would be expecting. The control panel also has an advanced mode. Now this is only going to be dealing with a portamento. So for example, let's give us a healthy amount of portamento like this here. And let's go to the advanced tab. So this is just going to change this to a switch. So we have different modes. So if this is going to be off, this is going to be normal mode. So this is going to be where notes glide into each other linearly. And if we click this one time here, this is going to be legato, as we can see right up here. Now this is similar to normal mode, but for the synth to glide, we have to have at least one note being held down while we play another mode. So let's switch over here to mono and let's check this out. If I hit a note, let go, hit another note, they're not going to glide when I'm hitting independent notes. However, if I hit a note, hold it down, and then play another note, it's going to glide. I'll let go of one of them, and then it glides again. And if we hit this button again, this is going to be glissando. Now here, the pitch is going to be quantized to the nearest whole note as it glides to the destination pitch. So let's take a listen to that real quick. And then the last option we have here is called both. Now this is basically going to be legato mode and glissando mode at the same time. Well, all right, guys, that does it for the control panel. In the next video, we're going to be tackling the arpeggiator down over here. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you learned something, and we'll see you in the next video.